So, welcome to week 4 and chapter 4 of Jewish Mysticism, Lessons in Tanya. And the topic of today's lesson is your inner/outer selves. Right? And the reason that the lesson is titled as such is because today, for the first time, we're going to talk about, right, we've spoken a lot about the soul as it is on a very internal level. This is who you are, this is how your soul works, right? What does it have to do with anybody around me? So decisions that I make based on things that go on in my soul might have to do with people around me, right? But how does that work? So today we're going to discuss a little bit as to how that works. So just to put things in perspective, in chapter 1, we introduced the concept, the novel concept, that the Alter Rebbe bases on previous Kabbalistic sources, that a Jew possesses 2 souls, right? We then said that of these 2 souls, one of them is animalistic. We dwelt on it briefly. And in the second chapter, we introduced the second or godly soul. We spoke a little bit about the origin of the godly soul, its drives, its source, and what it's all about. In the third lesson last week, we started discussing the anatomy of the soul. I'm trying to remember what the lesson title was. It was something along those lines, like the anatomy of the soul or something like that. Then we introduced for the first time the 10 powers, right? In Hebrew called the 10 Sefirot. Chachma, Bina, Dat. Together they make up the intellect of the soul. The next 6, Chesed, Gvura, Tiferet, right? Kindness, severity, etc. Which generally split, go into kindness and severity. That's the 2. And those are the emotive or the emotional parts of our soul. And we spoke about how this reflects the godly way of things going on, right? The way that God expresses himself to the world. That's how we express ourselves to other people. But all this so far has been focused on inside us. What's going on inside us. And today, we are going to introduce, for the first time, the clothes of the soul, right? So the garments of the soul. So in section 1, the Alter Rebbe will introduce us to the fact that a soul has 3 articles of clothing, or 3 garments. And as we go on, the Alter Rebbe will explain to us what the function of these garments are. In particular, we're discussing as they pertain to the godly soul, right? So, with regards to the animalistic soul, obviously, there will be a different way of interacting with these 3 garments. They will be used for negative, right? They'll be used for the opposite of good, right? But for the most part, in this lesson, the Alter Rebbe chooses to focus on the good. Of course, we're in the middle of our discussion about the godly soul, so we're trying to figure out how these garments affect the godly soul. And that, for today, is the framework for today's lesson. So, the Alter Rebbe begins by introducing... is there somebody that has a book? Can somebody pass me one of the books, like that I can do the... You have one? So can you pass me the one that was at your seat? Is that yours?
No, there's a...
Okay, perfect. So just use one, yeah. Perfect. Okay, so we're chapter 4. We're on page 63. 63. And the Alter Rebbe begins by introducing us, right, the Oid, and even more so, right? So more than the 10 inner powers which we discussed last week. Yesh lekol nefesh elokit, every godly soul contains shlosha levushim, 3 garments. Okay? And these are the 3 garments that the Alter Rebbe is going to introduce us to. Okay, now you're familiar with these. These are the functions that we use to communicate with the world. Okay? Number 1 is thought. We think about different things. Number 2 is speech. We speak to other people. Number 3 is action. Right? We act in certain manners. We interact with other human beings, with items in this world. We do things, right? Positive things, negative things, good things, not such good things. Ourselves. What was that? Talking to ourselves as well. Yeah, correct. So we have these 3 garments: thought, speech, and action. Right now. Why does the Alter Rebbe choose to use the word garment? Okay, the reason the Alter Rebbe chooses to use the word garment is because garment is going to garments, physical garments, clothing. Everyone in this room is wearing clothing. Have 3 unique qualities that the Alter Rebbe, or many really unique qualities, which are analogous of our thought, our speech, and our action. Okay, Number one, and most importantly, is what is the theme of the garment? Why do we have clothing? Why do we have clothing? Right? The reason we have clothing, contrary to popular opinion, just to cover your nakedness, it's a little bit more than just covering our nakedness. Beyond covering the fact that we might not be, covering our bodies for privacy, beyond that, our clothing reflect who we are to the world. Right? Our clothing tell a story about ourselves. Everyone in this room is wearing different types of clothing. They say different things about them, whether they're conscious or subconscious, right? So by me, a lot of it is conscious. I put on a jacket and a tie because I'm teaching a class and it's formal. By some of us, it might be subconscious. There might be things about our clothing, whether they're dirty or not, right, or whether they're sloppy or not. That might tell us a little bit about a person's character, right? Again, certain times when they're conscious, might be we put on a certain uniform, right? This is most common in the workplace, right? A doctor will wear a scrub. A lawyer will wear a jacket and a suit. Again,
clothes that protect and keep us warm.
Correct. But we said beyond that, there's also garments are a way of sending a message to the world, right? One of the biggest proofs of this is that, or the biggest ways of realizing this is that when we look at the way we dress in different scenarios, we dress differently based on where we are. But most importantly, when we're not anywhere, so when we're just at home, then many of those things fall away, right? So we might be asleep and barely wearing any clothing, right? Or we might be lounging around our home in sweats, right? But either way, we definitely don't feel the need to put on the same type of clothing or even as many clothing as we do when we're out with other people. And why is that? That's because, and this brings us to the second portion of garments. Garments are external, right? They're not for us. We don't put on clothing for ourselves, although this is another element of garments. Like Marguerite said, they do protect us, they do keep us warm, they do keep us private, right, etc. But from this perspective, at least from the fact that garments tell a message, we're not telling a message to ourselves. Right? We're telling a message to other people. Projecting, correct. For this reason, because garments are not part and parcel of who we are, we can change garments. Right? I don't know when the last time anybody's tried to change their skin. But it's not exactly a procedure that's undertaken, right? You can't change your body. You can't change your
tattoo.
What? You can tattoo, correct? But I'm not sure. I think that's something being injected into your body. You're not actually changing, right? The skin itself, you can't actually change your skin. That's not something that's changeable. That's more internal and more part of you. I mean, again, depending what level we're talking on. On a certain level, the soul is internal and the whole body is external, right? But let's just on a very basic level. For the same reason, garments can be borrowed, right? I can put on a garment that belongs to someone else, despite it not being my garment. Maybe even I don't like the way it looks, and I don't like the way it feels, but I can choose to put it on, right? Someone else's skin, even if I do like the way it looks and I do like the way it feels, I can't put it on no matter what, right? Now, why are these points so important? So these are the points that Alter Rebbe is trying to point out to us with regards to our garments, right? The garments of the soul, we said, are thought, speech, and action, right? Now, in these three garments, we'll soon get to the three levels of them, that there's thought, speech, and action, and they get progressively more external, as you can already picture in your own mind, right? Thought is the most internal of them all, speech is more external, and action is even more external than that. Everybody caught that? We're going to elaborate upon that soon. However, even before we get to that, these three garments are definitely external, and they shape the functions we use to interact with the world, right? Therefore, we'll find these qualities with regards to these three garments, and we will not find them with regards to the soul or any of the 10 powers in the soul, right? So let's talk about, for example, the fact that they're changeable, right? So we said thoughts can be changed, right? So we spoke about it in garments. Garments can be changed, right? Thoughts as well. Thoughts can be changed. I can think one way. Someone may come over to me, present a good argument. We have our discussion. That's all in speech, right? But then beyond that, I'll think about it, and then I'll change the way I think. I now think differently. Mm-hmm. Even on an even more surprising, I guess, level, is we can even think things that we don't agree with. Right? How many times do we use an exercise? It's a very positive exercise, by the way. I mean, it's not positive to to fool yourself or pretend yourself or right, pretend to be something that you aren't, right? But it is a positive, considered in the world, a positive exercise to think through somebody else's thoughts, right? If you're a Republican, to try to think in a Democrat way, along the lines that a Democrat might think. If you're a liberal, to think along the lines that a conservative might think, right? These help shape our openness or acceptance of other people's personalities, right? This unique quality of being able to think something, despite the fact that it completely contradicts the way we think or the way we understand things, is particularly, it stems from the fact that our garments are external. They're not part and parcel of who we are. The powers of our soul, on the other hand, are, at least for the purpose of this conversation, not changeable. Does that make sense? It's not. You can't really take your soul and say, I know that souls in general have chesed, but I don't want my soul to have chesed. It doesn't work that way. You don't get a choice about that. Your soul is a soul. You don't say, today I'm not going to give my soul. I'll switch with someone else. I'll take their soul. Their soul looks good. It looks like a good soul to spend the day, and let me spend the day with their soul. It just doesn't work that way, right? Our garments, our thoughts, as well as our speech, by the way, right? Speech is much more common, right? That people speak and they don't really mean what they're saying, right? They speak what they know the other person wants to hear, but this has nothing to do with what's going on inside their heart. It's not a reflection of who they are, right? And action, how much more so, right? People that are not a man of their word. That's what's going on, right? They're doing one thing. That the Mishnah talks about someone who's echad b'peh ve'echad b'lev. He thinks one thing in his heart, right? But he speaks a different way, right? The same thing can be with action. The person thinks one way and then acts a different way, right? He's pretending. He's putting on an ear, right? And so this is why we call these things garments. Now, what are garments? Right? How do these things work? So what's the process? So last week we spoke about the fact that anything that happens in our lives starts where? In Chachma. Right? Starts in that flash of it, like right at the beginning. It gets fleshed out into more of an idea. Then comes that stage which we dwelled upon a lot last week, which was das, that transitional stage, the getting it part, that moment when all of a sudden it ceases to be just an idea and it begins to develop into an emotion. Then it goes through our emotions, right? And in our emotions, we choose our emotions, right? Meaning we based on the intellect, based on the meditation or the thought process that we had that gave birth to that emotion, that's the emotion that will be born. Not necessarily an emotion. You don't have to use all 6 emotions, right? You can use in one day based on something you thought. You develop a love for something. Based on something else that you thought, you develop a hate for something, right? A hatred or a fear of something or a negative emotion, right? And now, beyond that, the next stage would be these powers. Now we begin to see a little bit more why the translator here chooses to use the word power. These powers then are enclosed, right? Remember, they are like the body, which is enclosed in a garment. They are enclosed in a garment. And that garment is either thought, speech, or action, or all 3, right? And that is how we interact with the world, right? So on a simple level, I look at Yosef Ilan and I tell him anything, right? And it seems as if all I'm doing is speaking. But on a much more dissected level, if we are to dissect this process, right, zoom in and see all the different steps along the way, we see that first I had a flash, and it might not all have happened in that moment. It might, right? We're constantly doing this. I had that flash, it got developed, it transitioned into an emotion. That emotion was expressed through a thought and speech in this case, right? If I do something to us, if I give him a hug, that's an expression of love through action, right? Now, and in this manner, we can do different types of things. We can do good things, obviously, and then we can do not such good things, right? As we discussed at the beginning of the lesson, for the purposes of today's conversation, we're going to be discussing mitzvahs. We're going to be discussing good things, and we're going to be discussing them as, right, so in this case we gave that I am expressing a certain emotion towards Yosef Ilan. We're going to be discussing how we express those emotions or those feelings towards God, right, through those thoughts, speech, or actions, right? Now, what are those actions called? Anybody? Mitzvot. Very, very good. Yes. Actions as a whole are garments. One second. So we'll get some examples soon. The examples that we're going to give, we'll give some examples as to how they can be used. Oh, I'm sorry. The examples that will be used will soon reflect the three different types of garments. But we'll get there. First, let's go through the process. So how does this work? So it starts off, so we're in bullet point number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. We're in bullet point number 6, right? The internal, the 10 powers of the soul make up our soul, or who we really are. The 10 internal powers enclose themselves in the 3 garments, and then comes a mitzvah, right? Now, what type of mitzvah we do? Remember, we're all in the godly soul. This is important to remember because we're about to get positive and negative here, but it's positive and negative in the positive. Positive and negative in spirituality or in godliness or in holiness, right? Meaning, we had the fact that we have a godly soul and an animalistic soul. On simple terms, it's called good and evil, right? It's very simplistic, and there's reasons why we don't use those terms, but on a very simplistic level, it's good and evil. However, even in good, remember we spoke about how gvura, we called it, what was the word we used for it? Holding back? What was the word we used for gvura last week? Forgot exactly. It's not necessarily just strength or severity or discipline, right? It can be just holding back, not giving, and that can sometimes be a good thing. Remember how we spoke about the example with the father and the son, or a parent and a child holding back the knife from a child, right? And how that's really good, but it's still holding back. So, when it comes to the mitzvahs, the mitzvot, for the most part, not for the most part, completely, the 613 mitzvahs are split in half, right? We have 365 negative commandments, and here the word negative comes into play, despite the fact that when I don't murder someone, I'm keeping a mitzvah. We're talking about something good that I'm doing, but it's something good that I'm doing by restraining myself from doing something, right? That's what a negative commandment is, right?
Oh.
So that's 365 negative commandments. Again, you caught that?
Yeah, I hadn't thought of it that way before.
So a negative commandment, let me repeat it just from a negative mitzvah, right? Or a don't mitzvah, means God tells us don't do this, and by us not doing it, we are essentially bringing holiness down into the world, right? We are doing a mitzvah, right? It's called a mitzvah losas.
Yeah, but we're not doing something negative. We're doing something positive.
We're not doing something positive. That's very important to understand. By not doing something negative, we have fulfilled the mitzvah. We have connected with godliness. We're going to discuss a little bit more about what a mitzvah is in a moment.
But the fact that we're obeying the commandment, isn't that a positive?
But the way that we obey the commandment is by not doing something. In general, the way we interact with something is by either doing something or not doing something. That's also a way of interacting with something, right? I'll never forget, I once heard a story about a man who survived the Holocaust. He told a rabbi that he marks Yom Kippur every year by, well, he didn't say it this way to the rabbi, but he told the rabbi that out of his anger or his, frustration with God and the fact that he doesn't understand how the Holocaust could have come to be, and I know this is not a conversation about the Holocaust,
right?
It's a whole conversation in and of itself. He says to himself, so therefore, every year on Yom Kippur, I make sure to eat pork with milk. Right? Now, so the rabbi looked at him and said, so 1 second. So you are marking Yom Kippur, right? You don't sit and eat pork and milk on January 1st, right? On Yom Kippur, you're marking. Now, is he marking Yom Kippur in a positive? He's marking Yom Kippur in a way, in a negative way, right? Meaning he's choosing not to partake in Yom Kippur. But the very fact that he's choosing not to, what was the example that we used to do as kids? Right? What do your parents always tell you? If another child is, or your parents or your teachers always, if another child is bothering you, what's the best thing to do? Ignore them, right? Because by you reacting or even worse, becoming affected, and right, that legitimizes the other person's action towards you, right? When someone teases you and you respond or you react or you even show your emotions, what you're doing is you're legitimizing and recognizing that act that person did to you. Authenticating is acknowledging. Authenticating. You're making it mean something. Now, when you choose to completely ignore that person, in other words, what you're saying is, I'm not now. So you could interact with the person in a positive way, saying, oh, you're teasing me, I love you. Right? That would be one way of interacting with the person. Another way of interacting with the person is saying, because you tease me, I'm upset at you, or I'm offended, or whatever it is. That's a negative way of interacting, right? Ignoring is saying, I want nothing to do with this, and this doesn't exist in my life. right? So there's really three stages that a person can be, right? Not doing any mitzvah, fulfilling a positive commandment, which essentially says, I am choosing to interact with this action, eating kosher, right? I'm choosing to eat, well, that's a negative commandment, technically. So, right, because it's not to eat non-kosher. Give tzedakah, right, Margaret? So, I'm choosing to give tzedakah. Let me choose to give tzedakah. I realize there's an act that I can do here, charity, to give money to a poor person, give food to a poor, to someone who needs it. And I am choosing to interact with that action. When I have a negative commandment, let's say stealing, because that's probably the best opposite for giving, right? When I face, let's say, with the action, remember, we're hyper-analyzing this, like that we get an understanding of it. Obviously, this doesn't mean that every time you walk down the street, you think to yourself, I have now an opportunity to steal, and I'm choosing not to steal. It's okay. It can continue to be naturally and subconsciously part of our beings. However, it's important to understand that what we do every time we don't steal, despite the fact that we always have the opportunity to steal, to choose to be like that, what we're doing is we see a certain action, and we choose to interact with it by not doing it. Does that make sense? Everybody with me?
Now going back to this Holocaust survivor.
Can we not? Is
okay.
Do you think it's relevant? I feel like it's not.
Okay.
I feel like it doesn't. That was brought down really as a side point.
Okay.
Just as a way of bringing out the point.
Okay.
Now, so what is the Alter Rebbe getting at here? That there are 365 negative commandments that we choose not, that we associate with by not doing them. There are 248 positive commandments that we choose to associate with them by doing them. Where does this action come from? A positive commandment is inspired by an emotion called love, or one of the derivatives of love. Remember how we discussed that love and fear are really like the head of the right and the head of the left, but really they have the other emotions that are under them, right? So you have chesed and gvura, but under that there's netzach hod yesod. That's when somebody brought up the diagram. Who was it that brought it, right? You brought up the diagram. So back to what we're saying. So anytime we choose to do something positive, it's inspired by a love of God, right? I love God, therefore I choose to connect with God by doing so and so, right? By fulfilling a positive commandment, or loving, or the other, right? The other, we won't get into all the details, but any derivative of love would also inspire that type of action. Does that make sense? We're good? Any negative commandment is inspired by what we'll call here a fear of God, right? But again, like we said, it's not necessarily fear. And it's specifically not, by the way, fear of retribution, or fear that I'm going to be struck down by lightning, or fear that I'm going to be punished, right? That's not fear of God. That's fear of something that God might do to you, which is considered a very low level in this context of an emotion which will drive you to do that. In fact, it's really a very roundabout way of that emotion affecting it, right? It's more of like a 1 + 1 = 2. I think that if I do this, then this will happen. Therefore, I don't do this. It's more like a consequence, right? We're not talking about that. We're talking about fear of God Himself, right? Let's not use the word fear, because most people, when they use the word fear, automatically it's like fear that that person will do something to me, right? Why am I afraid of the bully in the class? Because I'm afraid he's going to hit me. I'm not actually afraid of him, right? Talk about people you're actually afraid of. It's not. We don't usually use the word afraid. We use the word ashamed, or in awe, here's a good one. I'm afraid, which is fear, right? I'm afraid that this person will be disappointed with me. That's a real fear, right? Fear of your parents. When the Torah tells us, right? Usually they translate it as honor and respect your parents, not honor and fear, right? Because fear is like, children shouldn't fear their parents, right? That's, if you have abusive parents, heaven forbid, then you fear your parents, right? No, but that's fearing the whatever it is, the abuse that parent may inflict on you. An actual, legitimate, and healthy fear that a person should have for their parents is fear of disappointing them, right? Fear of them being ashamed of him. Fear of the person themselves, right? Which in our lexicon, better words would be awe or shame. I think was the whatever. These, right? And that's why they all fall under that category, right? The left side. Any such emotion will inspire a mitzvah, which is a negative commandment. In other words, will inspire because we're afraid of God. We're afraid that this is something that God doesn't want us to do. And as a result, by the way, so in this context, really, fear is really a derivative of love in a certain way. I don't want to complicate things. We're not going to go down that route. Right? But in a certain way, fear is developed by the fact that we love God. Therefore, we're afraid to. Right? Therefore, we don't want to. Right? But they're really not that connected. There's two completely separate and divided entities: fear, love, and fear. And fear of God, or awe of God, or right, whatever word we would use for it, is what inspires a negative commandment. What inspires us to see an interaction that we might interact with, right, and say, I want nothing to do with this, because of my awe of God, or because of my fear of God. Now,
What's the real word fear of God? Can it be misplaced but a little bit more legitimate, more
what do you mean?
fear of God? Why should I be fear of God? I have to.
There's a mitzvah. There's a mitzvah to be afraid of God. That's why, this is a very good question, what Margaret is asking. What Margaret is asking is, what's the basis for this, right? Why do I need to love God? Who decided I need to love God, right? Why do I need to fear God? So it's important to understand that one of the main reasons why the Alter Rebbe wrote Tanya is because the Alter Rebbe is trying to help us better our character, better who we are in terms of our relationship with God, right? Which automatically will better our relationship with the world, right? Because if we follow the godly path, we follow the Torah way, then automatically we'll be good and moral people, right? Now, not only that, the Alter Rebbe says that there are verses that say that this is an easy thing to do, right? Yet it seems that it's so difficult. The Alter Rebbe, at the first point, the Alter Rebbe, and this is, I know we're opening a parentheses, but it's a very important parenthesis, and I thank you, Margaret, for bringing this up. It's important to understand that it's really in this chapter that the Alter Rebbe for the first time addresses this at the heart of the issue, that if we want to get to anything else, right? Some of you came to this class because, I don't know, you're nervous that sometimes you get too angry at people. Some of you came to this class because, no, you're happy with your character, you want to better your character, you want to be an even better person, right? You want to be a better person, you want to be a more Torah observant person, you want to not struggle with keeping Shabbos or stealing, whichever one it is, right? Whatever type of struggle it is that you have, we have to get to the root of it. Why? Why do we do a mitzvah, right? Or not do the opposite of a mitzvah, right? The source of it is supposed to be, in a proper way, right? When things are healthy, the source of it is our emotions, which are based on our intellect, right? So now you see how this ties into the sequence of exactly what we're discussing here, right? And today, for the first time, we're going to start discussing actual scenarios where those things play out. Where that meditation, which, and obviously, and this is later, if I take a moment to work on those thoughts, what I think about in my mind, or my philosophy in my mind, that will change my emotions, which will change my thought, my speech, and my action, right? And this is precisely what the Alter Rebbe means by taking the long, short way and not the short, long way, right? The short, long way would be, I have an issue that I am having for a friend a kleptomaniac and I like to steal from people. So you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to keep trying not to do that. You're never going to get anywhere. And even if you do get somewhere, it's short-lived. It's not real. Just working on the action, because the action is based on something else. It's on something else. Great example. It just popped to my mind because this is something that I know someone who's struggling with. And this is an amazing example. I know someone who's struggling. One of their children has a fear, a legitimate psychological fear of entering an elevator. I don't know what it is. I don't know if it was inspired by a certain action, by something that happened, a story. I don't know, maybe you once got stuck in an elevator, whatever it is, right? 10, 13-year-old child, whatever, somewhere around there, right? 10, 11, 12-year-old child will not enter an elevator, right? So my first reaction to the parent was that's completely ridiculous. If you would force him to go into an elevator one time, then the fear would just go out the window, right? So the parent has explained to me on the phone. It's a friend of mine. The parent is explaining to me on the phone, and no, it doesn't work that way. You don't understand. This friend of mine just had a baby recently. The entire family went to go visit the new baby. This child did not. He stayed in the car downstairs. Forget even the fact that he didn't get to see his new baby brother, which obviously later he did. Much more than that, he embarrassed himself in front of all of his siblings who didn't know necessarily that he had this issue, right? There's obviously something deeply going on of it. If someone makes the mistake of saying, let me force him to go into the elevator, even if you do get him to force him to go into the elevator, maybe he'll be kicking and screaming the whole way, or maybe it'll even be a successful trial. And maybe you'll even get him to do it a few times. Will you have gotten rid of the issue? No. They're obviously taking him to therapy and things like that. The root of the issue, this is why we always go to therapy, right, is to start at the root. Right? Why are you afraid of an elevator? Why are you afraid of walking? Why? Because you have a certain emotion. Right? This is the emotion. Why do you have that emotion? Right? So the action is walking down. You won't walk into the elevator. Why? Because you have a fear. By the way, here you see it right away. It's a negative action. Right? It's a negative association with something that's developed by a fear. You have a fear of the elevator. Therefore, you don't walk into the elevator. So what's the fear based on? Right? So we got from step 2 to step 1. right? Now, the kunst, the point Alter was trying to teach us is that don't get stuck even by step 2, right? Let's say somebody, again, back to the kleptomaniac, right? Somebody that has an issue that he steals, or an issue that he lies, or an issue that he gets angry, right? So you say to yourself, okay, fine. The actual action that he did, right? It's not. You don't say this person has an issue with hitting other people, right? Because you realize that the issue is more than hitting other people. It's the emotion. It's because he gets angry at other people, therefore he hits them, right? But why do we stop there? We have to go one step further back. Why do you get angry at people? Is it something psychological? Is there something in you that's inspiring the emotion that then is causing the action, or the speech, or the thought, right? So now, by the way,
So by forcing the child to go into the elevator,
you wouldn't be solving the issue.
Yeah.
You have to sit him
Good
down
stuff.
and have a conversation.
Right.
Why is it that you're afraid of elevators?
Yeah.
Are you afraid the elevator's going to drop? Are you afraid that the elevator will get stuck and you'll be stuck there and you'll die of starvation? What is examine what's going on in his brain, and then talk it through with him. Maybe explain it to him. Get him to a position where in his mind he's overcome the issue, right? And then you'll look back at the parent, right, as the therapist. You look back at the parent and say, issue solved. And the parent will look at you and say, oh, really? Did you guys just went into an elevator? No, we never walked into an elevator. We didn't take it not up, not down. Do you even know that his emotion towards an elevator changed? No, I don't know that. So how do you know problem solved? I know problem solved because I'm 10 steps ahead, right? We fixed the problem in his brain.
The trauma.
Trauma, I don't know if trauma would
the
be...
source.
It's a good question in English, whether trauma would be an emotion or an intellect, maybe a mixture of both. But you fix the meditation, you fix the mental part of it, the intellectual part of it. Therefore, you can fix the emotional part of it. And the fact that the action, you try it out and you'll see, it works. And if it was done properly, then it will play out properly.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody on the same page as me?
Mm-hmm.
We're good?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so a mitzvah is done through the godly soul's 3 garments inspired by one of the 10 powers. So now, one of the main questions that should apply that we should have here, we can ask this a number of different ways. And on a simple level, why is it that Judaism is so obsessed with? Anybody? What's Judaism obsessed with? Meet a Chabad rabbi. What's the first thing he wants you to do? A mitzvah, put on tefillin, tzedakah, Shabbos candles, whatever it is, right? We're so obsessed with mitzvahs. In Yiddishkeit, in Judaism, we want you to do another mitzvah, do another holy act, do something, right? Actions are not only one of the 3 garments which are external, but they're the lowest of the 3 garments. Right? Why are you so obsessed with the mitzvah? Why are you so obsessed with the action? Is that a legitimate question, guys? Right? Now, another angle to ask the question from is, isn't the Alter Rebbe taking the approach that mitzvahs are not important? He's chosen to spend his whole book, and while he's going to reference mitzvahs, the whole time he's not going to talk. He's going to talk about the emotions, right? And so, we'll get to the answer later today. But most importantly, I want to point out to you, you already know the answer. What causes somebody to go to a therapist? Not that they have an issue with their brain. It's usually an issue with their thought, speech, or action, right? And sometimes you can wire it backwards. We'll talk about this in a moment, okay? But the actions are very, very important. The mitzvah is very, very important. Just because I asked the question, I don't want to leave it hanging like that. To give you the kernel of the answer, the point of the answer is that there's a difference when we're talking about ourselves, or we're talking about something outside of ourselves, right? So when we talk about ourselves, the most important thing is the fact that that's the way it is. The expression of that, the thought, the speech, or the action, meaning we're so used to thinking about ourselves that we automatically think the thought, the speech, or the action are nothing. They're not worth anything, right? But the best example of this is a relationship between, let's say, 2 spouses, right? You have 2 spouses. One spouse is always telling the other spouse, he always just expects the other spouse, right? So let's say a husband always expects his wife to know that he loves her. Why? Because that's the fact. He never once thinks about it. He never once speaks about it. And he never once acts upon it. I think there's a divorce in the making within a day. Right? He never once, not just he doesn't act on it, right? So sometimes you have a husband that says, and the wife looks at him, what did you do for me today? He didn't do anything for me today. No, but I love you so much, and he expresses his love to her. But he doesn't do anything. He doesn't buy her flowers. He doesn't actually do anything to express his love, right? Okay, so you could still say it works, right? On a further level, I don't think anybody in this world really goes for this, so this is enough for them. But you could say that if, I don't know, let's say if we had mind reading capability, if a woman was able to know that her husband is constantly thinking about her and actually obsessed with her and loves her and everything, right? That might be enough for her, right? That might be enough for her. If somehow, because the thought actually has, but if he doesn't even think about it, that's nothing, right? That's why when we talk about a relationship with God, the mitzvah is so important, because it's the action. And I just want to remind you, I think we've spoken about this before, that that's not because God needs the mitzvah, right? In the relationship between a husband and a wife, we say the reason that the action is so important, or the thought of the speech is so important, is because otherwise, how does the other spouse know about it? Right? Now with God, He knows about it. It's not, right? But over there, it's all about the other person. Over here, it's about the way we interact with the other person. In other words, it's about us expressing our love for God. That's the kernel of it. That's the point of it. Did anybody get that? Is anybody with me? Yeah. Right? So that's why a mitzvah is so important. Even if, by the way, that mitzvah is not inspired completely by love yet. We'll work on that. That's also very, very important. That's why there's a mitzvah to love and fear God. Right? 2 separate mitzvahs, by the way. Ahavas Hashem and Yiras Hashem. And it's one of there's only a number of mitzvahs, 7 I think, that are timidious, that are constant mitzvahs. There are only certain mitzvahs that are constant. You have to be doing them at every moment. Loving God and fearing God are 2 of them. Anyways, but enough about that. I mean, we're gonna touch back on it. But enough about that question about why the mitzvah is so important. Now, and I just want to go through this process one more time to explain, because this is what section 2 is about. Why, when we do a mitzvah, what's going on is we're merging with God. Why? When we do a mitzvah, we are merging with godliness via our garments, right? Now, what are these 3 garments? So we said we're going to analyze them now. We're in bullet point, thought, speech, and action in merging with God, right? What are these three garments? We said we'll analyze them one at a time. It's important to remember that they go progressively more external, right? And which is why we'll have mitzvahs that are associated with each step along the way. Why? Because if the point of these 3 garments in the godly soul is to do mitzvahs or to interact or to merge with godliness through these 3 garments, then there are going to be mitzvahs that go through these 3 steps, right? Thought is the lowest of them all, or the highest of them all, whichever you want to look at it, right? Depending whether you're looking from a godly perspective or from our perspective. It's very refined, very much still internal, right? Now, is it internal? No. Internal is something that can't be changed. Thoughts can be changed. Remember that? Thoughts have external qualities to them. Many times, by the way, or almost all the time, our thoughts, unless when we're alone or meditating, for most of our days, our thoughts revolve around our speech and our actions. Right now, my thoughts are completely involved in my speech for the most part. Right? That's what's so hard about teaching, is that you want to try to think through the concept, and the Chassidus loves to analyze what's going on right here, the teaching from one person to another person. What has to go on in the mind of the teacher, what has to go on in the mind of the student, etc. And that's because it's so enlightening as to how the godly process works. Chassidus talks about this at length. I mean, discourse after discourse from Rebbes from 200 years ago, from Rebbes from our Rebbe, they love to talk about it. But back to what's going on here is thought is definitely something external. There's no question, right? Many times it's actually associated with speech or action. I'm thinking about what I'm speaking about, or I'm thinking about what I'm doing, right? If I'm building something or I'm doing something, right? And that's why sometimes we find that you can't speak while you're doing something, right? Or you can't do something while you speak if you're completely involved in that, right? Like, it would be very hard for me to be doing anything that I actually had to focus on now, because my thought is involved in being translated into speech. Are you with me here? Yeah. So thought is really the most internal one of them, but it is external. Is everybody with me why it's external? Because I feel like an argument can be made that thought is completely internal, and it's part of the soul, but there are external qualities to it. It can be changed. You can think something that's outside of yourself that you actually don't agree with, that you never would have come up with, right? So a good example would be reading. When we read something, we're including somebody else's thoughts in our brains. Right? Later on, at another point, we might, or even during the time, we might analyze it and decide whether we agree with it or not. Anyways, speech is slightly more focused on others, slightly more focused on external, right? Sometimes people do speak to themselves, but for the most part, speech is reserved for speaking to other people. Right? Right now, I would like to interact with you who are sitting in this room, so therefore I speak to you. Right? And action, most external of all, is when there's a certain. Right? So before we get into the fact that we acquiesce to the action or to the object, 1 second, Jordy. Let me just finish this train of thought here. So when it comes to thought, there's almost nobody who can really change. Nobody really has control over your thoughts. Never. If anybody wants to, they got to suggest it to the board, right? The little man at the front decides whether he's going to let them even in, the secretary. Then it comes in. There's a little board meeting in the brain. Should we accept what this guy says or not? He's on our terms. This is our company, and we're going to decide whether we're going to allow it. No, we don't like it. Get out. Over. Yeah. This is my territory. Speech doesn't work that way. Right? Even though you get to choose your own words, the person who you're talking to controls your words to a certain degree. Right? If I started talking Chinese to Dan, do you speak Chinese? I should ask first. If I started to speak, is Chinese a language? No, Mandarin is a language, right? There's different types of that. So if I started to speak Mandarin to Dan, we wouldn't get anywhere. Right? It's nice. I can choose to do whatever I want. But the whole point of words is to communicate with him. In other words, and because it's more external than thoughts, he gets to control a little bit the fact that I need to talk in English. I need to use words in English that he understands. But much more important than that, I need him to understand me, right? So if Dan is a very intellectual person and I am a very intellectual person, we might be able to talk on a very intellectual level, right? If, we won't use Dan anymore, if we find someone else and they're on a child, right? They're on a much lower level than me intellectually, obviously it is my choice, right? But it's really not your choice. It's not like, oh, I'm going to let him, do we let him in or not? No. You want to talk to the child? Right? Nobody has to ask you. You don't have to ask anyone if you want to think a certain way. When it comes to the child, you do have to question your way of speaking because you got to dumb it down. Are we on the same page here? Action polarizes this, not polarizes. This is where I've always felt there should be a word in English called extremize. Action extremizes this point to the extreme, brings this thing to the extreme. Why? Because when I interact with an action, I am so limited, right? It's so much about the action that I'm doing or the object that I'm working with, right? There is very little I can do with water. Only what water allows me to do with it, right? I can wash my hands, I can drink it, but it's a liquid. I can never get it, right? In my thought, if I wanted to make water stand still as it did by the splitting of the Red Sea, I'd be able to, no problem, right? When it comes to actions, you can't. You're limited to what the action, because you're so external, you're so outside of yourself, you have a lot less control over it. Right? So that's the progressiveness of thought, speech, action in terms of how external it gets. Right? Now, what are examples of the way we interact with godliness with this? Right? So, Torah study, the highest level of connection to God, is when we say, this thought process, which is something external, but it's my garment, it's really my internal, external. Does that make sense at all? Yeah. It's my internal, it's the part of me that I interact with the world with, but it's mine. It's completely mine. It's very intimate. It's my little space. And I allow godliness in there. That's what Torah study is. Right? I mean, I don't think I need to elaborate, but just to elaborate, when I open up, right now in this room, right? But when I open up a book and I read through it, and it's godly thoughts, it's Torah, it's something that the wisdom of God put down inside a book through Moshe Rabbeinu, right? Through Moses. What I have done is I have chosen to make my thoughts godly, to think in a godly way, right? The Alter Rebbe is going to elaborate, especially on Torah study in the next chapter. But just to give you the preview of it, remember that we said how by God, him and his intellect are not two separate things? So essentially what I'm doing when I'm thinking the words of Torah is I have allowed God himself, not just godliness or a godly way of thinking, eliminate way of thinking and the word ness from the end of it. Because by God, those things don't exist. There isn't God and godliness, God and God's way of thinking. There's God and God and God. That's it, right? Hu amada, hu ayadua, hu ayodea, right? And Maimonides already told us this, and we'll never be able to understand. That he should be the knower, the knowledge, and the thing that's known, right? So 1 second, let me just finish this point. So when we allow that inside of us, inside our brains, which is really the essence of who we are, that's the internal, external of us, which means it's the highest level of the way that we actually are doing something, and then we make that godliness. So the word that the Alter Rebbe uses is that I become completely engulfed, and I completely engulf godliness. We merge, right? That's what he calls this section of the chapter, merging with God, merging with godliness. I hope I'm not giving away too much in the next chapter, and I don't want to overwhelm you guys too much, but that's what actually in yeshivas, we used to exercise two methods of learning. One method of learning is cover ground. Another method of learning was called iyun, which means to delve into it or to analyze it, etc. Right? Now, from a scholarly perspective, what would I tell you? Yeah, you need to have both, because you've got to have a breadth of knowledge, you've got to have quantity of study. And if you would study everything on the deepest level, analyzing it and getting nitty-gritty on every single thing, you can't study that much, right? That's why you got to have that quantitative learning, where you'll finish an entire tractate of Talmud in a couple months, right? And you got to have the nitty-gritty. You got to have the getting down deep into it, right? And that's true, obviously. It's also a scholarly pursuit, learning Torah, right? But from a perspective where studying Torah is an attempt at becoming one with God, right? What is the highest way that I can become one with God? So there's one thing where I read through it. Okay, God says that I don't know, Shabbos, you're supposed to do this, you're not supposed to do that, right? Remember the sages teach this, remember there's a Torah thought here, we learn a parasha, right? So I'm using my thought process for godly thoughts to go through it. Even though we just explained how deep that is, that's one thing. Another thing is when I use my logic, right? My powers of analyzation, and I actually analyze something godly. And the highest level is when I can come up with something, not a fake, I say that I came up with my own idea, but really it's a combination of a couple of other ideas. But when I can actually use my power of creativity with godliness, in other words, I find a question somewhere that something in the Torah doesn't make sense, and it actually bothers me, and it actually runs to the core of my intellect, and I'm using every power of my brain now. Right? The same way scientists will sit and struggle over something for years, and I use that to struggle over Torah, and to actually come up with something that solves that solution, right? And actually use my powers of intellectualism or logic or analytical powers. And that's the highest level of merging with God or becoming one with God that there could be. Right? Because remember that God, that's a very high level of interacting with someone else as well. That's a phone call. Gitty, I'm wrapping up. Is it urgent? That was my wife. I apologize. I wouldn't pick up for anyone else.
Don't apologize.
Now, so that is the highest level of oneness I can become with God, especially understanding that godliness and God are the same thing, right? That godly thoughts and God are the same thing. Okay? All right, fine. Enough talking about next week's lesson. The Alter Rebbe is going to elaborate on it a lot more, and it could be that next week's lesson will be shorter, while this week's lesson will be a little longer because we spent time on it. Okay, prayer is using our words, right? Is using our words to praise Hashem, right? Like spouses will know this. The more you talk about how much you love someone, right? Or not even spouses. Sometimes it can be about your parents. Like the more you talk about it, sometimes the more you actually, Ruth will see you, right? The more you'll actually become, your love will be inspired more. The more you say I love you, the more you actually do love the person. This is, by the way, scientifically proven, just by way of studies and examples. My favorite is actually similar to that, by the way, how actions can affect you. Oh, that's also true, by the way, that actions can affect your emotion is, and that's next step that we use, using our actions to declare our devotion to God, acting godly, right? So we had thinking godliness, the highest of all, speaking godliness, or speaking to God, is expressing our love for God. And then we have the highest level of all, right? When we do a mitzvah, like Marguerite said, tzedakah or anything like that, when we do something that God wants, like when we do something that our spouse wants, right? That's also an interesting connection with God. It's also an interesting way of expressing our love. And that also really can affect our love backwards, right? We spoke about how sometimes you can wire it the other way. My favorite example of this is that scientists have found that by biting on a pencil, has anybody ever heard this before? That if you're in a bad mood, take a pencil, stick it between your teeth, and bite on the pencil. Here, I'll use one of them. I'll throw it out.
It's okay. We know what
I've
happened.
heard that joke. Yeah.
Bite on a pencil for about 2 minutes, and then you'll begin to feel happier. Anybody tell me why?
You're smiling.
No,
Very,
the
very good,
muscles.
very
The
good.
muscles.
Because you're forcing yourself to smile. You're not in the mood of smiling. You just lost $1 million. You're, I don't know, someone just passed away, whatever. And you really, it's very hard. It's very, very hard to smile. Have you ever tried to smile when you're really not in the mood of smiling?
Yeah.
Right? My parents used to tell me that. I'll give it to you, don't worry, but you have to stop crying first. It's the hardest thing. When you're in the middle of crying, you're so caught up, it's very hard not to do that. But if you take a pencil, force your teeth and force yourself to smile, that will put you in a better mood. Right? So your actions can actually affect the way you are. What?
The brain is wired that way.
What was that?
No.
Our brains are wired that way, but it's also, there's something spiritual going on. There's something...
It's called the psychosomatic connection. Your muscle actually releases certain endorphins reduce emotions.
Okay.
Yeah. It produces spirit.
I guess that's the scientific terminology.
You're
For it.
saying doing a mitzvah.
I can't help on that level. All right. So now, very briefly, the last section will be very, very short. Very briefly, this is why, right? This is we call rethinking the afterlife. This is why all of a sudden it puts things in perspective. The Mishnah says that better is 1 hour of repentance and good deeds in this world than all the life of the world to come. As a rabbi, sometimes you need to go visit people in hospitals. This is like one of the most quoted ones, right? Because deal with people sometimes that want to just give up, and it is up to them. You know, they're maybe they're actually elderly and they're at the end of their lives, or they're very, 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 very ill, and you know they really feel like they want to give up, and it's your job to strengthen them, right? And one of the most powerful things you can tell somebody is that no matter what you'll accomplish in the world to come, by us just now taking 10 seconds to put on tefillin or to or do a quick mitzvah, right? It's worth more than all of the life of the world to come. Right? Think of the world to come. It's described, the souls are hanging out in heaven and they're basking in the ray of godliness. Isn't that like the most spiritual thing that can be? Isn't that like the highest spiritual level that can be? No. No. One moment in this world, I'm tempted to use the word stupid, right? One mundane, physical, lowly mitzvah is the highest spiritual thing you can do in this world. Right? Even in the world, even beyond this world. Why is that? Why is that? That's based on what we just said. Why? Because when you are spiritual, there's no kunst, there's no novelty to the fact that the spirituality is all one. Right? For an angel to be godly, is there anything to? There's nothing to that. Right? An angel is godliness. That is the spiritual makeup of an angel. It's godliness. That's what it is. For a human being to do a mitzvah, right? What he is doing is he's taking something which sort of, quote unquote, defies God, quote unquote, is its own existence, and he's merging it with God. My thoughts, which sometimes think atheistic thoughts, an atheistic word? Atheist, right? Completely denouncing God. I take those thoughts and they become one with God. They merge with God. That was the whole point of creation. To actually do a mitzvah down here in this world, right? To merge with godliness, right?
In this world, we can do actions, over there don't.
Correct. I mean, they can do actions, but their actions are all dictated by what godliness wants, because they are godliness. That's what they are. Now, the last thing to address is just what. So why is this so valuable, right? And why is it done through our garments? Aren't garments external? Wouldn't it be amazing if we were able to somehow, just through chesed, do whatever it is that we need to do with God without bypassing thought, speech, and action? Right? Why do we need to get to this stage of garments? Aren't garments very external? Doesn't that by essentially make them very low? Right? So you have that, so that's exactly what we were just talking about. But the fact that they're so low, right, is missed. Now, the only question left is why doesn't this disturb the connection? Right? The fact that it's physical, the fact that it's external should disturb the connection. Right? It's not the real me. Right? So the answer is no. They don't disturb because they're just, we use the word garments and external the whole time, right? We use garments as a way of explaining it's our way of interacting with the world. I've seen another translation of Tanya where they don't use the word garments. You know, the word that Alter uses is actually clothing, right? But the word that they use to describe it is functions, right? Thought, speech, and action are our functions. They're just our way of dealing with the world, right? But to clarify it, in garments itself, the Alter explains, even though I use the word garments, right? The solution to why garments don't disturb comes from the pasuk in Tehillim, where King David says, and his right hand embraces me. Right? And when I do a mitzvah, Hashem hugs me, right? Now, when's the last time you heard somebody hugging the king, right, or hugging somebody else, and somebody looks at him and says, oh my gosh, look at him. Look at him. He's hugging that Calvin Klein suit, inside which there's a human being. It doesn't work that way, right? The suit is just the way that this person interacts with the world. That's just the clothing this person wears. Who is he hugging? He's hugging the king. He's hugging, this other human being. That's the way it works. So the clothing is just our function or our way of interacting with godliness. So it doesn't disturb, it only enhances our connection or our merging, let's call it, right? This merging process with godliness. And with this, we conclude chapter 4 of Tanya, of our lesson of Jewish mysticism lessons in Tanya, your inner and outer selves.